I watched my sister Rachel stride into the boardroom at Sterling and Associates, her Louboutins clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who believed she'd earned her place there. She hadn't. Every step she took was stolen from me, built on connections I'd spent years cultivating, relationships I'd nurtured with late nights and genuine care. And in my past life, I'd been too naive, too trusting, too stupid to see it until it was far too late. But this time, I had a phone in my hand and a number I'd memorized in both lifetimes. "Mr. Chen," I said when he picked up, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "This is Diana Wu. I need to talk to you about Rachel Wu, the junior partner at Sterling and Associates, the one who claims she facilitated your company's merger last year." There was a pause, then, "Diana Wu, James Wu's daughter, I thought you were dead," I finished. I got better. The silence on the other end told me everything. Richard Chen, CEO of Chen Industries and my father's oldest friend, was listening. Really listening. And in 3 hours, my sister would be called into a termination meeting she never saw coming, just like I never saw the car that killed me. Let me take you back 6 months. 6 months ago, I died on a rainy Tuesday evening, 28 years old, leaving behind a career I'd worked myself to the bone for and a family that had spent decades bleeding me dry. I was driving home from the office, again, at 11 p.m., again, after covering for Rachel, again, when a semi-truck ran a red light and turned my sedan into scrap metal. I remember the impact. I remember the pain. I remember thinking, with crystal clarity as my consciousness faded, that I'd wasted my entire life being a doormat for people who never loved me. And then I woke up in my childhood bedroom, 18 years old again, with a decade's worth of memories and a burning rage in my chest that threatened to consume me whole. The woman staring back at me from the mirror was me at 18, fresh-faced, hopeful, stupidly optimistic. I'd just graduated high school with honors. In 2 weeks, I was supposed to start at Stanford on a full scholarship. My life was supposed to be beginning, but I knew how it ended. And I knew exactly who'd pushed me toward that ending, smile by smile, favor by favor, until there was nothing left of me but exhaustion and debt. My sister Rachel. In my first life, Rachel had been the golden child. 3 years older than me, beautiful, charismatic, and utterly devoid of work ethic or moral compass. While I spent my teenage years studying, working part-time jobs, and building the grades that would earn me that Stanford scholarship, Rachel was partying, shopping, and spending our parents' money like water. Our parents, that's a whole different story of dysfunction. Dad was a successful commercial real estate developer who believed sons were meant to inherit empires and daughters were meant to marry well. He tolerated my academic success but never celebrated it. Mom was a former beauty queen who'd taught Rachel that a pretty face and the right connections were worth more than any degree. When I got into Stanford, Dad's response was, "That's nice, Diana. Just don't expect me to pay for anything beyond the scholarship." Rachel needs a new car. Rachel was 21 and on her third new car. I was 18 and taking the bus. But I didn't care. I had my scholarship. I had my future. I was getting out. Stanford was everything I dreamed of. I threw myself into my studies, majored in economics with a minor in international business, and started building a network that would define my career. I befriended the children of industry titans, impressed professors who'd go on to recommend me for incredible opportunities, and cultivated relationships with visiting executives who came to give lectures. I did this naturally. I was genuinely interested in people, in their stories, in their work. I asked good questions. I listened. I followed up. I remembered birthdays and business anniversaries. I sent articles I thought they'd find interesting. I wasn't networking. I was making friends who happened to be powerful and influential. Richard Chen was one of them. He'd come to give a guest lecture my sophomore year, and I'd asked him about a merger his company had completed in Malaysia. We'd ended up talking for 2 hours over coffee. He became a mentor, then a family friend. When he met my father at my graduation, they'd bonded over real estate and golf. Richard had started inviting Dad to his annual charity galas. There was also Margaret Liu, the founder of a tech startup who'd been a visiting professor. Patricia Coleman, the CMO of a Fortune 500 company who'd judged a case competition I won. David Zhang, a venture capitalist who'd backed 3 unicorns. These weren't just names in my contact list. These were people I'd helped, learned from, and genuinely cared about. After graduation, I landed a job at Sterling and Associates, a prestigious consulting firm in San Francisco. I was good at my work. Exceptional, actually. I brought insights my colleagues missed, asked the questions that cracked open problems, and most importantly, I could connect clients with the exact people they needed to meet. My network was my superpower, and Rachel, who'd barely graduated from a state school with a communications degree and a 2.3 GPA, noticed. It started small, a favor here, an introduction there. Diana, my friend needs a job. Can you put in a good word at your firm? Diana, I'm applying to this marketing agency. Don't you know someone there? Diana, could you introduce me to Richard Chen? I have a business idea. I said yes. Every time I said yes. Because she was my sister, and despite everything, despite the childhood of being the unfavorite, despite being overlooked and undervalued, I wanted to believe that blood meant something. So I made the introductions, I vouched for her, I spent social capital I'd carefully accumulated to open doors for someone who couldn't be bothered to study, to work hard, to earn anything on her own merit. Rachel didn't get hired at Sterling and Associates. She wasn't qualified, but I got her an interview at a smaller consulting firm. She lasted 6 months before getting fired for missing deadlines. I got her another job at a friend's marketing agency. She quit after 3 months because the hours were too demanding. Each failure reflected on me. Each time she disappointed someone I'd recommended her to, it chipped away at my credibility. But I kept trying, kept helping, kept believing that eventually she'd find her footing. Then came the Chen Industries opportunity. I was 25. I'd been at Sterling and Associates for 3 years and had just made junior partner, the youngest in the firm's history. Richard Chen's company was planning a major merger with a European firm, and he wanted Sterling to consult on the integration strategy. He specifically requested me. It was the project that would make my career. 6 months of intense work, high-profile exposure, and a success fee that would set me up for senior partner track. Rachel was 28 and unemployed again. She'd bounced between 5 jobs in 7 years and was living in our parents' house, spending her days shopping and her nights at clubs. I need you to introduce me to Richard Chen, she said one day over lunch. Rachel, no, this is a huge project for me. I'm not asking you to get me a job, she interrupted, her eyes wide and innocent. I just want to meet him. Network a little. You're always saying how important connections are. I should have said no. God, I should have said no, but she was my sister. And she seemed sincere. And I was stupid enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was finally taking her career seriously. I introduced them at a charity gala. Casual, brief, nothing more. 3 weeks later, Richard mentioned that Rachel had been emailing him with interesting insights about the European market. She'd apparently been researching the merger, sending him articles, asking smart questions. I was surprised, impressed even. Maybe she really was turning things around. I didn't know she'd been stealing information from my laptop. I'd been working from home, and she still had a key to my apartment. She'd been reading my confidential project files, my strategy memos, my analysis, and presenting it all as her own thoughts. The merger went through successfully. Sterling and Associates got credited, I got my bonus and promotion, and everything seemed fine. Until 6 months later, when Rachel announced she'd been hired as a junior partner at Sterling and Associates. I was stunned. How? Richard Chen recommended me, she said, smiling that beautiful, innocent smile that had gotten her out of trouble her whole life. He was so impressed with my insights on the merger. He called the managing partners personally. Something cold settled in my stomach. What insights? Just some research I did. Market analysis, cultural considerations for the integration, stuff like that. My stuff, my analysis, my work. But I couldn't prove it. The files she'd stolen were from my personal laptop, not the firm's servers. There was no record of her accessing them, and Richard Chen believed she'd done original research. I confronted her privately. She laughed. I'd actually laughed. Come on, Diana, you weren't using those ideas anymore. The project was over. I just repurposed them. You stole my work and used it to get a job at my firm. I leveraged available resources, she corrected. That's what networking is, right? Using connections? You've been preaching that to me for years. That's not Rachel, you committed fraud. Did I, or did I just impress the right person at the right time? She leaned forward. Look, we're family. What's yours is mine, right? Besides, you should be happy for me. I finally have a real career. Isn't that what you always wanted? I wanted to scream. I wanted to go to the managing partners and expose her. But she'd been clever. The recommendation from Richard Chen was legitimate. He genuinely believed she was talented. If I accused her of stealing my work, it would look like jealousy. Like I couldn't handle my sister succeeding at my firm. So I swallowed it. I stayed quiet. And I watched as Rachel sailed through on my reputation, my connections, my work. She was terrible at the job, absolutely terrible. She missed deadlines, produced subpar work, and alienated clients with her arrogance. But she was charismatic enough to talk her way out of trouble. And whenever she was about to fail completely, she'd come to me. Diana, I need help with this analysis. Diana, can you introduce me to someone who knows about this industry? Diana, can you look over my presentation? And like an idiot, I helped. Every single time. Because she was my sister, and if she failed catastrophically at my firm, it would reflect on me too. I was trapped in a cycle of enabling her mediocrity to protect my own reputation. It got worse. She started taking credit for my work more openly. In meetings, she'd present ideas I'd mentioned to her in passing. She'd name-drop connections I'd introduced her to, implying she'd cultivated those relationships herself. She even started dressing like me, talking like me, mimicking my mannerisms in client meetings. She was wearing my life like a costume. Our parents loved it. Finally, both daughters were successful. Finally, Rachel had matured. Dad started including her in business conversations he'd never had with me. Mom bragged about having 2 daughters in consulting. They had no idea one daughter was a parasite feeding off the other. The final straw came when I was 28. I'd been working on landing Chen Industries as a long-term strategic client. It would have been the biggest account of my career, worth millions in recurring revenue. I'd spent 2 years nurturing that relationship, preparing proposals, demonstrating value. Rachel found out, and she went to Richard Chen directly with a proposal she'd stolen from my laptop again, and pitched it as her own idea. Richard was impressed, but instead of giving the project to her, he called the managing partners and suggested that Rachel and I co-lead the account. The Wu sisters together, he'd said. Unstoppable team. I was furious. This was my project, my relationship, my work, but I couldn't say no without looking petty. And Rachel smiled sweetly and said, "This will be great, Diana. Just like old times." There were no old times. There was only me working and her stealing. We started the project. I did 90% of the work. Rachel showed up to meetings, smiled pretty, and took 50% of the credit. And whenever I tried to set boundaries, whenever I tried to push back, she'd weaponize our parents. Mom says you're being selfish. Dad thinks you're jealous of my success. Why can't you just be happy for your sister? I was drowning, working 80-hour weeks to cover for her incompetence, watching my health deteriorate, losing friends because I had no time for anything but work, and getting none of the recognition I deserved. The night I died, I'd been at the office until 11, covering for another of Rachel's missed deadlines. She'd been at a spa day. I was exhausted, burned out, running on caffeine and spite. And then the truck hit, and everything went dark. But I didn't stay dark. I woke up at 18 again, and this time, I knew exactly what was coming. The first few days were disorienting. I kept expecting to see my 28-year-old face in the mirror, kept reaching for a phone that had apps that didn't exist yet, kept having to remind myself that the last decade hadn't happened yet. Except it had. In my memory, in my soul, in the bitter knowledge of exactly how my family would exploit me if I let them. This time, I wouldn't. I still went to Stanford. That scholarship was mine, earned through my own merit, and no one could take it from me. But I changed how I approached everything else. I still built my network. I still became friends with Richard Chen, Margaret Liu, Patricia Coleman, David Zhang, and all the others. These were genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests. I valued these people and they valued me. But this time, I didn't tell my family, not a word. When Rachel asked me about school, I kept it vague. It's fine, lots of studying. When Dad asked about my internships, I downplayed them. Just basic stuff, filing mostly. When Mom asked if I'd met anyone important, I lied. Not really, everyone's pretty focused on grades. I graduated with the same honors, the same degree, the same glowing recommendations. I got the same job offer from Sterling and Associates, and my family thought I was just a regular entry-level consultant, nothing special. Rachel, meanwhile, followed the same path as before. State school, barely passing, no work ethic, no connections of her own. She bounced between jobs, got fired, got hired again through our parents' pressure on their friends, got fired again. By the time I was 21 and she was 24, the pattern was established. She was the family disappointment, and I was the quiet, dependable daughter who didn't cause trouble. Perfect. I worked at Sterling and Associates, and I was good. Exceptional. But I kept my biggest successes quiet. When I landed a major client, I didn't mention it at family dinners. When I got promoted, I told my parents it was a small raise, nothing major. When Richard Chen started giving me high-profile projects, I never said a word. My network grew stronger. My reputation grew more solid. And my family had no idea. Until the day Rachel asked me for help. I was 24, the same age I'd been when she first asked me to introduce her to Richard Chen in my previous life. We were at a family dinner, and she was complaining about her latest job. "I just don't understand why nothing works out for me," she whined. "You have it so easy, Diana. Boring consulting work, but at least it's stable." Boring. She thought my work was boring. I'd just closed a $50 million deal that afternoon. I'd negotiated contracts in 3 languages and coordinated teams across 4 continents. But sure, boring. "You should introduce me to some people at your firm," Rachel continued. "Maybe they're hiring. I'd be so good at consulting." And there it was, the same request that had started my downfall in the first timeline. "I don't think Sterling is hiring right now," I said carefully. "Well, ask around. You must know someone who's hiring." "Actually, I don't really know many people. I mostly just do my work and go home." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Don't be modest, Diana. You went to Stanford. You must have made some connections." "Not really. I was focused on grades." I saw the frustration flash across her face. She'd expected me to roll over immediately, to start making calls and opening doors like the naive fool I'd been before. "That's such a waste," Mom interjected. "Diana, the whole point of going to a good school is networking. You should have been building relationships, not just studying." "Your mother's right," Dad added. "Your sister needs help. The least you can do is make some introductions." The least I could do. As if I hadn't already given her everything in another life. As if I owed her anything in this one. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice apologetic. "I really don't know anyone who's hiring." Rachel stared at me like I'd slapped her. She was used to getting what she wanted, especially from me. "Fine," she said coldly. "I'll figure it out. Myself." She tried. Over the next few months, she applied to dozens of firms, including Sterling and Associates. She didn't get a single interview. Her resume was thin, her GPA was abysmal, and she had no real skills to offer. And this time, she didn't have my connections to steal. I watched her struggle with a satisfaction that probably made me a terrible person. But every time I felt a twinge of guilt, I remembered the decade of exploitation, the stolen work, the ruined health, the fatal exhaustion that had killed me. No, I wasn't terrible. I was protecting myself. Meanwhile, I continued building my career the right way. I made junior partner at 25, just like before. Richard Chen gave me the Chen Industries merger project, just like before. Except this time, Rachel didn't know about it. She didn't have access to my apartment, my laptop, or my files. The merger was a massive success. I got my bonus, my promotion, and Richard's eternal gratitude. He started calling me his secret weapon and recommending me to all his business associates. And Rachel? Rachel got fired from her latest job, a receptionist position at a dental office, for being late too many times. She was furious. At 27, she was unemployed again, living with our parents and watching her younger sister succeed while she failed. The golden child was tarnishing, and she hated it. That's when she started digging. Rachel wasn't stupid, just lazy. And when she got desperate enough, she could be resourceful. She started asking questions, calling my old Stanford classmates, looking me up online, trying to figure out if I'd been lying about not having connections. She found out about Richard Chen, about Margaret Liu, about the network I'd been carefully hiding from her. I came home one evening to find her waiting outside my apartment building. "You lied to me," she said without preamble. "About what?" "Richard Chen, Margaret Liu, David Zhang. You know all of them. You've been working with them for years." I kept my face neutral. They're professional contacts, Rachel. That's different from being friends. Professional contacts? She laughed bitterly. "Richard Chen called you his secret weapon in an interview last month. Margaret Liu wrote a recommendation letter for your promotion. You've been hiding this from me. From the family." "I haven't been hiding anything. I just don't broadcast every detail of my work life." "Because you're selfish." Her voice rose. "I'm your sister. I'm struggling. And you have all these connections and you won't help me?" "Rachel, I've recommended you for jobs before. When? Name one time." She had me there. In this timeline, I'd never helped her, never vouched for her, never opened a single door. "You're not entitled to my connections," I said quietly. "We're family." "That doesn't mean I owe you my career." She stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. The Diana she knew, the pushover who'd sacrifice. Everything for family harmony didn't exist in this timeline. "I'm going to tell Mom and Dad what you're doing," she threatened. "Tell them what? That I've been successful at my job and didn't give you a play-by-play? That you've been selfish and secretive and deliberately sabotaging my career by withholding opportunities?" I almost laughed. "Rachel, me not helping you isn't the same as sabotaging you. You're responsible for your own career." "We'll see what they say about that." She stormed off, and true to her word, she went straight to our parents. The next family dinner was uncomfortable. Dad was cold, Mom was passive-aggressive, and Rachel was playing the victim beautifully. "I just don't understand why Diana won't help her own sister," Mom said, sighing dramatically. "Family is supposed to support each other." "I do support Rachel," I replied. "I've given her advice, helped her with her resume." "But you won't introduce her to anyone," Dad interrupted. "You have connections, Diana, important connections, and you're hoarding them." "I'm not hoarding them. These are professional relationships I've built over years. They're not commodities I can just hand out." "Rachel needs help," Mom said. "She's been struggling, and you could fix that with one phone call." One phone call. That phrase sent a chill down my spine. In my previous life, one phone call to Richard Chen had led to Rachel getting hired at Sterling and Associates. One recommendation had started her parasitic career. "If I recommend someone who isn't qualified, it reflects badly on me," I explained. "These relationships are built on trust. If I abuse that trust, I lose those connections entirely." "Are you saying I'm not qualified?" Rachel demanded. "I'm saying you need to build your own career, earn your own opportunities." "You're a bitch," she spat. "You know that? A selfish, cold-hearted bitch." "Rachel," Mom gasped, but she didn't sound particularly upset. "No, she needs to hear this," Rachel continued. "She's been pretending to be this sweet, helpful person, but she's actually sabotaging me. She went to Stanford, met all these rich people, and now she won't share any of it. What kind of sister does that?" "The kind who learned her lesson," I said quietly. "What lesson?" I looked at her, really looked at her. In my previous life, I'd died believing she might eventually feel remorse. That somewhere deep down she'd cared about me as more than a resource to exploit. But looking at her now, at the entitled rage on her face, I realized she would never have felt guilty. She would have attended my funeral, cried pretty tears, and immediately started looking for the next person to use. "You're not entitled to my life, Rachel. Build your own." I left the dinner. I blocked their calls for a week, and when I finally answered, I told them I needed space from the family for a while. They were shocked, outraged. How dare I prioritize my own well-being over family harmony? But I held firm, and slowly Rachel faded from my daily life. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd finally gotten a job at a small marketing firm, on her own merits this time, because she had no other choice. She was mediocre at it, but managed to keep it. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Rachel was patient. I'd underestimated that. For 2 years, she left me alone. No calls, no surprise visits, no manipulation through our parents. She seemed to have accepted that I wasn't going to help her, but she was planning. I was 26 when I found out what she'd been doing. I got a call from Margaret Liu, the tech founder who'd been my mentor since Stanford. "Diana, I need to talk to you about something sensitive," Margaret said. My stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "I've been getting emails from someone claiming to be your sister, Rachel Wu. She's been asking for an introduction to some of my investors, saying you recommended she reach out to me." Ice flooded my veins. "I never recommended that." "I didn't think so, but she's been very persistent, and she seems to know a lot about your work with me. Details that aren't public." "What kind of details?" "The specifics of the project you consulted on last year, the confidential strategy recommendations you made. She's been using that information to sound credible." I closed my eyes. "Margaret, I'm so sorry. I don't know how she got that information. I need you to handle this, Diana. This person is either a fraud using your name, or she's your sister violating confidentiality agreements. Either way, it needs to stop." After I hung up, I checked my apartment. My laptop was password protected, my files were encrypted, my work stayed at the office. There was no way Rachel could have accessed my current projects, unless she'd hired someone. I did some digging. It took 3 days and a favor from a tech-savvy friend, but I found it. Spyware on my work laptop. Sophisticated enough that I hadn't noticed it, designed to capture screenshots and keystrokes. It had been installed 4 months ago during a company holiday party where I'd briefly left my laptop in my office. Rachel had been at that party. I'd been surprised to see her. She'd crashed it, claiming she was meeting me for dinner afterward. We'd never actually had dinner. She'd made an excuse and left after 20 minutes. 20 minutes. More than enough time to install spyware if you had the USB drive ready. I had the spyware removed and all my passwords changed. Then I contacted every single person in my network with a warning. "If anyone claiming to be my sister or representing me contacts you, please let me know immediately. There's been a security breach." The responses came flooding in. Rachel had contacted at least 15 people, using stolen information to sound credible, asking for introductions, opportunities, investments. She'd been building a fake persona as Diana Wu's sister and business partner. She'd been stealing my identity. I could have pressed charges. The spyware alone was illegal, and what she was doing probably constituted fraud, but I had a better idea. I let her keep going. I fed her false information through my now secured systems, fake projects, fake clients, fake opportunities, and I watched as she used those lies to dig herself deeper. She started telling people she was working on a major tech investment deal. She name-dropped companies that didn't exist and investors I'd made up. She even created a fake LLC and started accepting consulting fees from people who thought they were buying access to my network. It was a spectacular house of cards, and I was waiting for the perfect moment to make it collapse. That moment came 6 months later. Rachel had somehow convinced a small group of investors that she could get them early access to a Series B funding round for a hot tech startup. The startup was real, one of Margaret Liu's portfolio companies, but the investment opportunity was completely fabricated. She collected $200,000 in commitment fees from these investors, promising them that her connections, me, though she never said my name directly, would get them first priority. The problem? The startup wasn't raising a Series B. I knew this because Margaret had told me they were being acquired instead. But Rachel, working off my fake information, didn't know that. When the acquisition was announced publicly, the investors Rachel had scammed immediately demanded their money back. She panicked and did what she always did, tried to blame me. She sent emails to all of them claiming I had given her bad information, that I was the one who'd promised the Series B access, that she was just an intermediary. The investors weren't stupid. They'd never heard of me in connection with these deals. They started asking questions, doing research, and they found out that Rachel Wu was not a licensed investment advisor, was not affiliated with any legitimate firm, and had no legal right to be collecting investment fees. They threatened legal action. Rachel, desperate, made the worst decision possible. She went to Richard Chen for help. She called his office and somehow convinced his assistant that it was an emergency related to me. Richard, concerned, took the call. Rachel spun a story about how we'd been working together on investment deals, how I'd given her bad information, how she was now facing legal trouble because of my mistakes. She begged him to help her, to use his influence to make the problem go away. Richard, to his credit, didn't immediately believe her. Instead, he called me. "Diana, I just got a very strange call from someone claiming to be your sister." What did she want? He told me everything. The fake investments, the collected fees, the legal threats, the attempt to blame me. Richard, I need to be very clear. I have never worked with Rachel on anything. I have no involvement in any of this. She's been impersonating me and stealing confidential information for months. There was a long silence. Then, do you have proof? I have evidence of spyware she installed on my laptop. I have emails she sent to people in my network using stolen information. I have documentation of every false claim she's made. Send it to me. All of it. I did. And Richard, who'd built a multi-billion-dollar company and hadn't gotten there by being naive, saw exactly what Rachel was: a con artist using her sister's reputation to commit fraud. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Nothing yet, but I need you to trust me on something." "Of course." "Rachel is going to keep escalating. When she does, I'm going to need you to make a call for me." "Just tell me when." Rachel didn't disappoint. Over the next month, as the investors continued threatening legal action, she got more desperate. She started telling people she worked at Sterling and Associates, my firm. She created a fake email address with a domain that looked almost identical to Sterling's. She started cold calling potential clients, offering consulting services at steep fees. She even started showing up to industry events, introducing herself as Rachel Wu from Sterling and Associates, and handing out business cards she'd printed herself. Someone finally called Sterling to verify her employment. That's when I made my move. I'd been waiting for this. I had a file an inch thick, documenting everything: the spyware, the fake emails, the investment fraud, the impersonation of a Sterling employee, the use of my confidential work product. I'd been building this case for months. I took it to the managing partners. They were horrified. A fraudster had been actively impersonating one of their junior partners, potentially exposing the firm to legal liability. They immediately sent cease and desist letters to Rachel, filed a complaint with the State Bar Association, and alerted their legal team. But I asked them for one more thing. Wait 3 days before taking any public action. I need to close the loop on something. They agreed, trusting my judgment. In those 3 days, Rachel, unaware that Sterling was coming for her, made her final, fatal mistake. She applied for a job at a competitor firm, a big one of Sterling's main rivals. And on her resume, she listed junior partner at Sterling and Associates with a tenure of 3 years. She also listed Richard Chen as a reference. The hiring manager doing due diligence called Richard to verify. That's when Richard called me. "Diana, I just got a reference check for your sister. She's claiming she's been a partner at Sterling for 3 years and that we've worked together on multiple projects." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "Richard, this is it. This is what I needed. Can you do something for me?" "Name it." "Tell them the truth, all of it. That she's never worked at Sterling, that she's been committing fraud using my name, that she's currently facing legal action, and then, call the hiring manager at the other firm and tell them Sterling and Associates is about to make a public statement about Rachel Wu, and they might want to wait before making any hiring decisions." Richard was quiet for a moment, then, "You've been planning this. For months. She really hurt you, didn't she? Not in this life, I mean. Before, however you knew what she'd do." I'd never told Richard about my rebirth, but he was perceptive. He'd noticed things, my unusual confidence for someone so young, my uncanny ability to predict business trends, the way I sometimes spoke about the future as if I'd already lived it. "She destroyed me," I said quietly. "In another life, she bled me dry until there was nothing left. I died exhausted and alone, and she would have moved on without a second thought." "Then let's make sure she can't do that to you or anyone else in this life." He made the calls. The next 48 hours were beautiful. The competitor firm, alarmed by Richard Chen's warning, not only rejected Rachel's application, but flagged her in industry databases as a potential fraud risk. Sterling and Associates issued a public statement clarifying that Rachel Wu had never been an employee and that they were pursuing legal action against her for impersonation and fraud. The investors she'd scammed filed a civil lawsuit for the $200,000 plus damages. The State Bar Association opened an investigation into unauthorized practice of law. She'd been calling herself a legal consultant in some of her emails. And Margaret Liu, protective of her reputation and her companies, sent a letter to every major player in the tech industry warning them about Rachel's schemes. In 1 week, Rachel Wu went from being an annoying fraudster to a blacklisted pariah. But I wasn't done. I'd kept one final card to play, and it was time to use it. I called my parents. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about Rachel." They were cold on the phone. We'd barely spoken since I'd set boundaries 2 years ago. "What about her?" Dad asked. "She's been arrested." Silence. "What?" Mom's voice was shrill. "Fraud charges. She's been impersonating me, stealing confidential information, and scamming investors. The police arrested her this morning." It was a slight exaggeration. The arrest was actually a request to come in for questioning. But I knew Rachel would spin it differently to them. Better to control the narrative. "That's impossible," Dad said. "Rachel wouldn't—" "Dad, I have proof, months of documentation. The spyware she installed on my laptop, the fake emails she sent using my name, the $200,000 she collected from investors for a fake deal. Sterling and Associates is suing her. Richard Chen has given a statement against her. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's fraud." "Richard Chen?" Mom's voice wavered. They'd met Richard at events, knew his reputation. If he was involved, this was serious. "She used my connections, my work, my reputation to run a scam. And when it fell apart, she tried to blame me. She's been lying to you for years about her career, her connections, everything." I heard Dad take a sharp breath. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Would you have believed me? You've spent my entire life choosing Rachel over me, giving her everything while I had to earn every scrap of respect. I stopped trying to convince you of who she really is." "Diana," Mom started. "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm calling because you need to know. Rachel is going to need a lawyer. A good one. And she's going to ask you for money. Probably a lot of money. What you do with that is your choice." I hung up before they could respond. Over the next few months, I watched from a distance as Rachel's life imploded completely. The civil lawsuit moved forward. She couldn't pay back the $200,000, so the investors got a judgment against her. Her credit was destroyed. Her assets, what little she had, were seized. The criminal investigation took longer, but eventually, the district attorney decided to prosecute. The evidence was overwhelming: the spyware, the fake credentials, the wire fraud from collecting investment fees. Rachel was looking at serious prison time. Our parents hired her a lawyer, a good one. He managed to negotiate a plea deal: 2 years in prison, 5 years of probation, and full restitution to the victims. Rachel, faced with the alternative of a trial she'd definitely lose and a much longer sentence, took the deal. She tried to reach out to me once, through our mother. "Rachel wants to apologize," Mom said. She wants to see you before she has to go." "No." "Diana, she's your sister." "She was never my sister." She was a parasite, and I'm done being her host. Mom cried, Dad yelled. They called me cruel, heartless, unforgiving. I didn't care. Rachel went to prison, and I went back to my life. Sterling and Associates promoted me to senior partner when I was 27. I was the youngest senior partner in the firm's history, a record I'd also held as junior partner. The Chen Industries account became one of our flagship clients, generating millions in annual revenue. Richard Chen became more than a mentor. He became a true friend, someone who understood what I'd been through and respected the strength it took to protect myself. My network grew stronger. Margaret Liu introduced me to venture capitalists who became clients. Patricia Coleman brought me into Fortune 500 boardrooms. David Zhang partnered with me on investment deals that made us both very wealthy. At 28, the age I'd been when I died in my previous life, I was living in a penthouse in San Francisco, driving a car I'd bought with cash, and had a net worth that would have seemed impossible to my younger self. But more than the money, more than the success, I had something I'd never had in my first life: peace. I wasn't exhausted. I wasn't being bled dry. I wasn't covering for someone else's incompetence or sacrificing my health for family harmony. I was free. Rachel was released from prison when I was 30. She served 18 months of her 2-year sentence and got out on good behavior. She tried to contact me again. Emails, letters, messages through our parents. All of them said the same thing. She was sorry. She'd changed. She wanted a chance to rebuild our relationship. I blocked her on everything. Our parents predictably thought I was being too harsh. She made mistakes, Mom said. But she's paid for them. Can't you forgive her? Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation, I replied. I can forgive her for my own peace of mind, but I don't have to let her back into my life. She's family, Diana. No, she's a biological relative. Family is chosen, not assigned. They didn't understand. They probably never would. They were still living in the delusion that blood meant obligation, that shared DNA meant unconditional support regardless of how toxic that person was. I'd learned better. Twice. Rachel tried for a few more months, then seemed to give up. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working as a receptionist at a small medical office, living in a studio apartment, taking the bus to work. It was a humble life, a normal life. The kind of life she would have had all along if she'd never had me to exploit. Part of me, a very small part, felt bad for her. But then I remembered the truck, the impact, dying at 28, with nothing to show for my life but exhaustion and debt. And I felt nothing but satisfaction. At 32, I made managing partner at Sterling and Associates. I was running the firm, setting strategy, mentoring the next generation of consultants. Richard Chen threw a celebration dinner at his estate. My entire network was there. All the people I'd built genuine relationships with over the years, all the friends who'd become partners and collaborators. Margaret Liu gave a toast to Diana Wu, who proves that integrity, intelligence, and hard work will always triumph over shortcuts and schemes. Everyone raised their glasses. I looked around the room at the life I'd built, not inherited, not stolen, not borrowed from someone else's work. Mine, earned through every late night, every smart decision, every relationship I'd nurtured with care and authenticity. This was my victory. Not just over Rachel, but over the version of myself who'd been too afraid to set boundaries, too desperate for approval to protect her own interests. I'd been given a second chance at life, and I'd used it to become someone who couldn't be exploited, someone who knew her worth, someone who understood that the most important call you can make isn't to a powerful connection or a potential client. It's the call you make to yourself, setting boundaries and choosing self-respect over family pressure. I made that call, and everything else followed. Years later, I was 38 and had just closed the biggest deal of my career, a billion-dollar merger that would reshape an entire industry. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile on me, Diana Wu, the consultant who sees the future. If only they knew. I was at a coffee shop near my office reading the article on my tablet when someone approached my table. It was Rachel. She looked older than 38. Hard living and regret had aged her. She was wearing a discount store blouse and carrying a purse that had seen better days. Diana, she said quietly. I looked up at her, my face neutral. Rachel. I saw the article. I wanted to say congratulations. Thank you. She shifted her weight, uncomfortable. And I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, and I know you have no reason to accept my apology, but I needed to say it. I studied her. She looked sincere, broken even. Prison and its aftermath had stripped away the arrogance, the entitlement, the sparkle that had let her charm her way through life. I accept your apology, I said. Hope flashed in her eyes. But that doesn't mean I want you in my life. You spent years viewing me as a resource to exploit. You would have bled me dry and never thought twice about it. I can forgive that. But I can't forget it. And I won't risk it happening again. The hope died. I understand. She started to walk away, then paused. For what it's worth, you were right about building my own life. I should have done that from the beginning. Instead, I wasted years trying to steal yours. Yes, I agreed, and you did. She nodded and left. I watched her go, feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not pity. Nothing. She was a stranger now. A cautionary tale about what happens when you try to build a life on someone else's foundation. And I was exactly where I deserved to be. At the top, on my own merit, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. I finished my coffee and went back to the office. I had a company to run, a network to nurture, and a future to build. A future that was entirely, completely, triumphantly mine. Epilogue. At 40, I'm the CEO of my own consulting firm. I spun out from Sterling and Associates 3 years ago with their blessing and took half their top clients with me. The firm's called Woo Advisory, and we specialize in cross-cultural mergers and international expansion strategy. We're worth $200 million and growing. Richard Chen is on my board of directors. Margaret Liu is an investor. Patricia Coleman is our CMO. David Zhang handles our venture deals. Every person who believed in me, who saw my value when I was just a Stanford student asking good questions, has become part of my success story because I valued them as people, not as tools, because I built genuine relationships, not transactional ones, because I earned every opportunity instead of stealing it. I've been married for 2 years now to a wonderful man I met at a charity gala, a human rights lawyer who shares my values and my work ethic. We're talking about starting a family. My parents and I have a cordial but distant relationship. They see me at holidays, we make small talk, and they brag about my success to their friends. They'll never apologize for choosing Rachel over me for all those years, and I've made peace with that. You can't expect people to acknowledge mistakes they don't believe they made. Rachel is still working as a receptionist. She'll be on probation for another year. She'll never work in consulting, tech, or finance. Her criminal record and industry blacklisting saw to that. She lives modestly and, from what I hear, quietly. I don't wish her harm, but I don't wish her well either. She's simply irrelevant to my life. Sometimes I think about my first life, about the woman I was, desperate for family approval, willing to sacrifice everything for people who saw her as a resource to drain. About the car crash that killed her at 28, exhausted and alone. That woman taught me the most important lesson of my second life. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Blood doesn't entitle anyone to your labor, your connections, your success, or your peace of mind. Family should be a source of support, not a system of exploitation. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is make one call, not to a connection, not to a client, not to a powerful ally. A call to yourself, a boundary, a line in the sand that says, I am worth protecting. I am worth choosing. I am worth fighting for. I made that call when I was 18 in this life, newly reborn with memories of how badly things could go. And every success I've had since then has been a direct result of that single crucial decision to choose myself, to build my own life, to earn my own victories, and to never ever let anyone steal from me again. The story of my sister using my connections ends the same way in both timelines, with her facing consequences for fraud. But the story of me, Diana Wu, ends differently. In my first life, I died broken. In this life, I'm thriving. And that makes all the difference. Last week, I gave a keynote speech at my alma mater, Stanford. I talked about networking, about building genuine relationships, about the difference between using people and valuing them. A young woman came up to me afterward. My sister keeps asking me to introduce her to my contacts, she said quietly. But she doesn't do any of the work. She just wants to use what I've built. And I feel guilty saying no because we're family. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw myself at 18, at 21, at 25, before I learned the difference between helping and enabling. Family should be proud of your success and want you to thrive, I told her. If they only see you as a stepping stone to their own advancement, that's not family. That's exploitation. And you're allowed to say no. But what if they hate me for it? Then they never loved you in the first place. They loved what you could do for them. And you deserve better than that. Tears welled up in her eyes. Thank you. I needed to hear that. I hugged her, this young woman who reminded me so much of my former self. Protect yourself, I whispered. Choose yourself. Build your own empire. And never apologize for refusing to be used. She nodded and walked away, standing a little taller. And I smiled, knowing that somewhere in a parallel universe, a different Diana Wu was still sacrificing herself for a family that would never appreciate it. But in this universe, Diana Wu was free, and that was worth everything.